Hi, everyone. Joanne Hamburg with the Real Estate Exchange, and I'm excited to have Nick Tolmeyer here with me today from the Law Office of Attorney David Rochford's in Leominster, Mass. And today we're going to talk about purchasing foreclosed properties and the things that you should know so that you can invest and make more money and in the long run make the right choices. But Nick, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, about your career and working with the Law Office of Attorney David Rochford?
Sure. So I've been with Dave's office since 2007. I've been doing real estate since I finished law school in '01. So I've been, at it for, well, coming up on 23 years. And again, much like Dave in my office, this is all we do. Real estate only, conveyancing only. I mean, that's what we do. And, we've done a ton of it. We've done, foreclosures, REOs, everything from A to B if it involves real estate on the buying and selling of each, fixing title problems, identifying title problems. Um, you name it, we do it.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, we've been working with your company for years. I've known Dave and Danielle for long, long time. So we'll just get right into it. But if anyone has any questions, you're welcome to put them in the chat and we'll try to address them at the end or when we have a moment. But when you're looking at purchasing a foreclosed property, like evaluating the property to ensure you're making the best decision possible, that yes, I want to buy a foreclosed property is what kind of things do you think the buyer should be looking at?
Well, the short answer is, for starters, I mean, is it worth it? And that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. We've had folks that have bought bank-owned properties with the intent to live in them. So if somebody's going to live in the property, they may not be looking for as much of a good deal as much as somebody who might be in it for to flip it. In the sense that if somebody's flipping it, they're going to get in, fix it, and get out, and they have a profit margin they're concerned about. We've had people that have bought property that has been bank owned. They're going to move into the property, and they're not them moving into a property they want to live in. Of course, is a lot different than somebody. They may not have the need to make as much money instantly because they're going to stay there. So they will treat it differently. So there's a lot of things to consider depending on your kind of buyer, but also other things to think about is what's the end value of the property? How much is it going to cost to get it there? How much is you paying for it? How damaged is it? How much work might it need? So there's a lot of things to think about. Um, you
Like,
know,
like like I mentioned, I've bought a few properties from auction and foreclosure and the foreclosure properties, there's so many different ways to find them too. But I think for me, it's, finding one that's in an area that's close to me because I like properties that are close, but sometimes people will buy foreclosures that are in another state. So that's a whole different thing to consider, but you had mentioned about condition and what kind of things do you think they should be like concerned about besides the condition? Obviously, the condition is a big one, but what kind of things should we be looking out for with a
yeah. So if you find a foreclosed property or one that's going to be soon to be hitting the market that's been foreclosed on. Is it vacant? Is it occupied? How long has it been vacant if it is vacant? Has the property been secured? Is it open to the elements? Because again, it's like if a property's been vacant for a period of time for too long, that becomes an issue, and we can talk about that in a little bit. If the property's occupied, you're gonna have to get those people out of there. And if it's occupied and it's got somebody in there, then you're gonna have trouble getting title insurance. So you have to be a cash buyer in a lot of these situations. And again, if it might be tricky to get financing too, in a sense that if it's not habitable, it's gonna be a different kind of loan. Again, if it's occupied, title insurance, you're not going to if I have the ability to issue it because if somebody's in there, they can challenge a foreclosure. So there's a myriad of things to think about. And conditions just one small part of it, and price.
well, one of the things you just mentioned, what if it's occupied? Who's going to be responsible for removing the occupant? If
But
you're
I mean, and again, that's a huge issue. in a sense that if it's being sold and it's occupied and you buy it with somebody in it, presumably you're going to have to get them out, especially if you purchase it with it. So yeah, that's one of the other things too. Is one of the things to consider is it sort of a package deal, meaning does it come with a buyer or a former tenant, former owner, those sorts of things. So whether or not you want to consider evicting them, that can be a problem. Only in a sense that if someone wants to fight a foreclosure, you could be in for quite a fight, especially if they don't vacate the property.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Your company doesn't handle evictions, does it?
no, we don't. We actually, because landlord tenant law in Massachusetts is just such a specialty that we have folks that we refer them to for an eviction process.
Mhm.
Uh, it gets very, very tricky when it's a former owner that's occupying, because a lot of times, I've seen it where clients will want to buy a bank-owned property, the former owner's in there, and this former owner is going to challenge the foreclosure. If you buy that property from the bank with somebody in it, you step into the shoes of that bank. Now you have to essentially defend the bank's work on the foreclosure. So again, you could be in for quite a fight, and any legal court proceeding is going to start costing money, and shrink that profit margin, eat that window up real quick if it becomes a real problem.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's definitely a cost someone's going to want to incorporate when they're thinking about purchasing a foreclosure if it is occupied. What about other associated costs like tax liens, or is that something that in most cases the buyer is going to assume, or when you take title to a foreclosed property that, they're purchasing it from the bank, that the title has been cleared to that point with all the liens and taxes
yeah.
and payments?
So generally, the answer to that question is the difference between buying at auction and buying at, for a foreclosed, having been foreclosed already. They typically will call a foreclosed property, or will sometimes here call it an REO sale, meaning the bank is taking it back and they're selling it. So the opportunity with that is when you enter into a contract for foreclosed, on a foreclosed property, you have some ability to hire a closing attorney, and they're going to examine title, and presumably, you'll have some ability to identify the title and if there's any kind of an issues with it. So what we'll do is we'll examine title and find out if title they can convey good title and what the status of the liens are. And generally, they got to give you title, no less than insurable title. So a lot of things to consider as far as title go with respect to foreclosed property is the language in some of these foreclosure riders will have language at the very end that talks about insurable title. Now, the problem with insurable title is there may be identified title insurance or title issue, but title insurance is already on the hook for it, so they will indemnify a future purchaser. So there's an insurance policy that covers your ownership interest. It's not necessarily a good quality of title as say good, clear, marketable title. But any good closing attorney will look and make sure that you understand what it is you're buying. Um, so you at least with the REO property, you have the ability to get somewhat clean title ish.
So what was like marketable title versus insurable title? It's basically that marketable title means that it's clear, the title's clear, you can sell it to anyone, where insurable title means that you have a title insurance company who's guaranteeing that it's going to be okay.
Correct. So a good
Okay.
example is, yeah, so a good quick way to I can explain that is, let's say I do a title exam and I find out there's a undischarged tax lien, or there's a mortgage that wasn't discharged correctly, or some other issue with title. But what happens is the bank that's foreclosing on the property has a title insurance policy that was issued when that mortgage was recorded by that closing attorney, which basically is a title insurance policy for the bank. So what will happen is the bank will foreclose on property, and if there's a subsequent issue with title, they will make a claim on their title insurance policy, and that title insurance company will indemnify the next buyer. But that issue still exists on title. It's just as an insurance policy that's going to cover it. So even something as simple as a missing assignment, so meaning a mortgage, an assignment to a certain bank, but the discharge doesn't match the most recent assignment, technically that's a title issue, and technically it's not good, clear, marketable title. So this insurable title is a lesser quality of title than good, clean, squeaky clean title with no issues.
Well, being even a traditional purchase versus a foreclosure, I always recommend my clients get title insurance because you never know what happened down the road, and another attorney might have missed something. I mean, things come up that happened years ago that, somebody might have missed, and I'm sure you see that all the time.
Yeah, so that's the other part of it too is yeah, everybody's human. So other attorneys make mistakes. So again, a title insurance policy is sort of essentially an insurance policy to cover you, and it's not like any other insurance. It's not one of these. It's not. You never buy insurance with the intent of having to use it, but you're glad you have it when you did. And so that's what these things will cover. Title insurance will, essentially, it's sort of an insurance policy. But let's say, so you buy property REO, the foreclosure was done a certain way. But what happens is, let's say that there's a court case, somebody sues a bank, they will change all the foreclosure laws. So you can have a set of facts where the former foreclosure that was good at one point, the law changes it, so it's no longer a good foreclosure. Now you've created a title problem after you've purchased it. In a sense, that title was fine before, it's not fine anymore. And a title insurance policy is um, a great
It's
thing.
just great. Yes, it's great to have. I've had a few clients, we've had to use the title insurance just to get us into the next transaction. And, I've
Correct.
had clients that have said, well, I have lender's title insurance. Why do I need title insurance? And I try to explain to them that that covers the lender. It doesn't cover you, and you want your own protection. And so it's, to me, I think it's for the money it costs for title insurance, no matter what property you're purchasing. I think that's good
It's
advice
it's
for any buyer. The other,
yes.
what about timeline with purchasing a foreclosure? Do you find that they take longer to close, or they close quicker? What has been your experience with that?
I've actually seen on foreclosed properties both ends of the scale. So I've seen foreclosure properties where they'll close fast, but then I've had foreclosed properties where, because the seller is usually a bank, if it's a Bank of America, then yeah, there's a process. So a lot of times it takes longer to get the foreclosure deeds signed or the REO deeds, meaning, hey, you're dealing with the servicer who's selling it. They got to get the deed signed by the note holder, the foreclosed bank that actually owns it, and they have to get a POA from somebody else. So sometimes there's this delay in the closing because they have to go get the documents signed. And
The
if Fannie,
domino effect.
yeah, exactly. And of course, if it's Fannie Mae, that's the selling bank. Well, how can I put this? I'm never surprised or never the never the glacial speed of the glacial speed at which the government can move it sometimes is not to be underestimated.
But and sometimes there's just so many parties involved, it just takes longer. Other times, I mean, I usually, most of the foreclosures we've bought have been cash, and they've been able to close pretty quickly. But sometimes you have financing involved, and that takes, time to put together. One of the things you had mentioned on was about the property being abandoned or vacant. How do you protect or make sure that the home is protected between the time that it's under agreement and the time that you close, that it doesn't get vandalized? I mean, what are there any things that you could suggest that you could do where you're not technically the owner of the property, but protect your future asset?
So yeah, I mean, one of the things you can do, and this is why I always advocate for, using local agents, using local brokers. Those brokers are in real estate agents are going to know the other agents that are listing properties. So if you have a good local agent and you have who's a listing agent and you have a good local agent who's the buyer's agent, a lot of times if they're local, the agent that is selling the property on behalf of the bank has the ability to visit the property on a regular basis. So that's something to consider too, meaning, if for instance, Joanne, if you represent a buyer and you know the other agent that's listing this foreclosed property, you know them well, you know they're a good agent, you can have a conversation with them because you know them, you have a business relationship. Hey, listen, such and such, can you check on the property? Is it preserved? You know how they handle their transactions, they take care of things. So that's a factor to consider. A lot of these banks will hire, agents like from, some length of time away. So you know that they're not going to be there on a regular basis.
Mhm.
One of the possibilities too is if you also live in the area in which you're considering buying, you have the ability to drive by from time to time and take a look at it, just to keep an eye on it. The other part of it too is admittedly you don't own it, so you can't like do anything to it, but at least you can keep an eye on it. So for instance, if the squatter decides to move in, you can let the other agent know, they can call the cops. At some point, if squatters stay there for too long, it gets a little trickier the longer they stay there. Perhaps if there's a snowstorm coming and or some kind of weather event comes through and damages the property, sometimes, if it's caught or it's reasonable enough, listing broker can go ahead and call the lender and say, hey, listen, or the selling bank, this has happened to the property. Can I hire a contractor to go fix it? So, you have the ability to just keeping an eye on it. You have the ability to essentially, you know, minimize any potential and put the other people on notice as soon as possible.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I mean, doing a quick drive-by doesn't hurt, especially like in the winter around here. I mean, and a lot of times with the foreclosed properties, they will not have the utilities on, especially in the winter. So, a lot of these foreclosed properties, if you wanted to do a home inspection, say, it's more difficult to set up a home inspection. And if they'll allow you to do a home inspection, then you're going to need to pay to unwinterize it and then re-winterize it if it's in the winter. And in some cases, like you said, if they've been abandoned and the utilities are not on, that's a whole different can of worms, because if they say the electric's been disconnected for 6 months to a year, you have to reach out to the local electric company. You have to have an electrician come out and inspect the property to ensure that it's okay to turn the power on. So there's a lot of things that you want to consider when you are looking at those type of things. Do you see that there's any real difference between purchasing a regular transaction versus a foreclosed property? Have you seen any major difference in the process of closing?
From the legal perspective, meaning the attorney, from what I do, the process is title order comes in, we examine title, we look at title, tell sellers if there's a problem, get the executed deed, record it. But that's that's a typical roadmap. But at every stop, there's always something else that could show up that would delay the process. Titles are tricky with a foreclosure because there's foreclosure documents, there's notices, there's court documents, there's powers of attorney. All that stuff has to get looked at. So the title exams are a little bit more involved. If you're dealing with a lot of times, and this is why I know of the place called Coropolis, Pennsylvania, is because some particular REO outfit uses a servicer there. So you're always dealing with whoever their sort of law office is, but they're not local. So a lot of times you're dealing with a non-local law office that the servicer uses to represent them all over the country. So that can make the process more complicated, but not from the legal part of it, but from the logistical part of it, just because it's not a local bank. If let's say, one of your local banks with a local seller's attorney and somebody that we know on a regular basis, agents local, that has the ability to become, closer to a regular one than say out-of-state bank, out-of-state lawyer, out-of-state everything.
Much easier to communicate. And I know like we've had deals where it's a totally different time zone. The banks in California, and it makes it a little more challenging. So you kind of want to have an idea of who are the parties you're reaching out to so that you can structure your offer so that you have, 30 days or 45 days, whatever is a decent timeline. So you don't have to get into a ton of extensions, because a lot
Yeah,
of these banks don't want to do extensions. They want it closed. They want it done yesterday. They don't want to hear anything about it. No home inspection, no nothing. Be done with it. Goodbye. It's yours.
yeah, and it's a good point. A lot of, when we've had closings where the servicer, the selling attorneys, and a different time zone, we've had them, come to us at 4 o'clock, because you have to get the HUD approved, and so you send the HUD to the closing attorney or the seller's attorney, and he's then got to sell it to the, send it to the people that sign it, which are like somebody at the, bank, like a Bank of America, say. That takes a lot. Then, they want to close by the end of the month. And I can remember at least a couple transactions where we need to get this taken care of by the end of the month. Problem is, we send them closing disclosure at noon, which is 9 o'clock their time. We're waiting all day for them to get it back. Then they tell us at 4:30, they're like, okay, we need the money today. And it's like, it's too late to record. But
Mm,
because it's 4 o'clock here, but it's 1 o'clock there. So that becomes a problem. So that, that can be a logistical issue too, meaning if they're 3 hours behind and you're at the end of the month on a Friday and they're trying to get this, the HUD signed and, we're waiting around, that can make things tricky as well.
yeah. So it's just things to keep involved and kind of keep in mind who are the parties involved and how much time you're going to need to do it. Do you know of any like additional costs? Like I've seen sometimes on MLS, they'll have some foreclosed properties will be listed there, and they'll have a buyer premium or buyer agent's fee or additional fee. Have you ever seen anything on that on your end for additional
Um,
fees?
yes, sometimes there's like a doc prep fee. A lot of times you'll see, here's a good example, and I'm glad you brought that up. Sometimes you'll see purchase and sale agreements from REO banks where they say, if you use our closing attorney, we'll pay for your title insurance policy. It's like, well, and if you don't, then you have to pay for it. So sometimes there's some cost shifting that buyers will pick up just by wanting to use their own attorney. Um, I generally, well, I should, I generally don't see my clients doing that. But again, I suppose in retrospect, I don't see the ones that don't,
Hmm.
because they let the other side pay. But again, if you've got somebody selling you, foreclosed property, and they're going to tell you which closing outfit to use, how comfortable do you feel with their title work? Because they want to sell it to you, they hook you up with the guy and say, "Oh, it's fine."
Yeah, no,
Uh,
I agree. I would feel more comfortable having my attorney or my representative check to make sure that there's nothing out there because nobody's perfect. People make mistakes, you know?
right,
Um,
and again, it's like you're just trusting somebody you've never met. And a lot of times they're not somebody you can go drive down to if there's a problem later.
yeah,
Meaning, hey, if there's a problem later, who can I call? So you gotta have that end of it too. It's the old how good is this? A warranty's only as good as the person you're getting it from, because you gotta go and track them down if they're out of state or somewhere else. Well, that's gonna be a big huge headache for you. So and again, I've seen, like you said, some buyer premiums. Sometimes I always say the devil's in the details, but that contract sometimes will shift certain costs.
yeah. Well, and I know in previous experience, a lot of stuff now is done on the internet. And a lot of these companies will just have a real estate agent that they're paying a fee to that will list the property for sale, and then everything's done electronically. Your bid's submitted electronically and your timeline. And, what about, like I find it's difficult if you're dealing with a bank to get them to try to pay closing costs, or say you're buying a property that has a septic system and you have to deal with Title V inspection. The banks don't want to pay for that most cases. Sometimes you can get them to do it, but a lot of times they don't want to do any repairs to the property. And have you had any transactions where you've had to deal with the buyer being responsible for the Title V or?
Yeah, and that's one of the other things too to consider when looking at foreclosed properties is it hooked up to city sewage or does it have a septic? Foreclosed properties generally are as is. We've never actually seen it where the selling bank will go get a Title V certificate. So that's a cost that the buyers need to consider if they're buying it. A lot of times, my general advice is you have to, unless you have a passing certificate, you have to assume it's going to fail.
Hmm.
And you have to price accordingly if you have to fix it. And if you get lucky and it passes, great. Um, but it's something to think about. Again, you may have, and if you're an investor and you're going to flip it, that's much different than if somebody's going to buy it and live in it, because somebody's going to buy it and live in it, may be willing to replace a septic, and it's worth it to them, even if the end cost is about the same as what they paid for it, because they're not in to make a profit. But that's something to consider. Is if you buy it and the Title V's failed, before you can occupy it, the town's going to want want you to fix it. Um, again, if it's hooked up to city sewerage, that's a concern that doesn't exist. And I suppose, moving on from that too is, if the property's on a well, and if, you gotta test it. If it doesn't work, sorry, as is, you want it, it is what it is.
Yeah,
And that becomes even trickier with financing, because if you're gonna go to a conventional bank to try and finance a foreclosed property, it's got to comply as if it was a regular seller, meaning passing Title V, passing smokes, um, functional water, because you can't live there with no water. So can you even occupy it? And then if you can do, so then it's got to be a rehab loan or a construction loan, perhaps. And the bank's going to have to submit all these quotes to it. So it can get very, it's not for the faint of heart.
I'll agree with that. I know, like, you have to, it's a risk versus reward, I guess, so you're looking
Correct.
at, I'm looking like I buy properties that are in rough shape. So, I don't care if they need a septic. I know I have guys that can install them, but and in our case, we're not really financing. But, for someone who's financing, you got to be looking at Title V. You've got to be looking at, does the well produce water? Is the well contaminated? There's a lot of things that you want to consider. And you know, you definitely want to do a walkthrough. And, if you have someone who's knowledgeable in the construction field, have them come through with you, and ideally have a real estate agent that can help you with the market. I know, like in my case, if I'm looking at a property that I'm going to purchase or for one of my clients, I'll go in MLS and do a research to see, well, the last time it sold, did it have a passing Title V? Or did they replace the septic? Or I'll call the Board of Health and say, geez, do you have any plans on this septic system for this home? And they're like, no, that was put in 1960, and we don't have any plans or anything. So nobody has any idea what's, in the ground. So those are things that you want to kind of keep an eye out for. We do have a question that says, do you need to pay cash for buyers when it comes to purchasing a home at a foreclosure or an auction? And no, you don't. Nick, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah. So what I'd say is, if you're gonna, because it's a little bit different if it's at an auction or REO. So you can certainly purchase REO property with the lender. The seller doesn't care where their money is coming from, but you got to get it to them. If you want to bid at an auction, that's a little bit different. You got to usually give a deposit and be ready to close in 30 days. How or where you find the money to pay them, that's on you.
Yeah.
Uh,
We
if you
have
have,
another webinar in a couple weeks on auction properties. But one thing to think about is not all foreclosures are really bad. So, you want to look and see the condition, and a lot of the foreclosures will be listed with a real estate company, and they're provided through the multiple listing service, and any one of the agents, someone from my team even, could take you out to look at properties. And when you find one that you like, you'll be able to determine, like, is this financeable? Some homes are just not financeable. The buyer's responsible for the septic, or it needs a new roof and the windows are falling out, or the deck's completely off it. I mean, obviously, each property's condition is a little different. So you want to go see it, have a real estate agent that can help you and give you some advice on, the condition of the property. Can it be financed? And the other thing depends on your type of financing. There are so many different types of financing today, be it FHA, VA, conventional, USDA. There's home rehab loans. So there's so many different programs. So we always recommend meeting with a loan officer, getting pre-approved, let your agent know what your situation is. And that way we can open you up to everything and try to find the best property for you. I hope that answers your question. Yes, you can finance foreclosed properties. And, is there anything like that you would come to mind that we might not have mentioned that would be like the most riskiest thing about purchasing a foreclosure, Nick?
the only thing I can say is each property has its own inherent risk, from condition to occupancy, length of vacancy, title. It all really varies, and you sort of have to have, the stomach to, accept some risk. Because you can have a property, looks good, you walk through, it looks fine, and then once you buy it and get in there, knob and tube wiring. And some stuff you can't find until you start taking walls down, if you're gonna rehab the whole place. I know once you take down certain walls, you do get to a certain level of, rehabbing a property. Now you get the city and the zoning involved, and the building inspector gets involved. So it all depends on what you're gonna do, and each one has its own is sort of a collection of risk on. It could be on any number of different things. I mean, you could in theory buy a property and afterwards find out it's got an underground oil tank. How would you, and how would you, home inspection may not reveal that.
No, no. But you do a little homework, and like I said, having a good real estate agent to look for you and check out the background, check with the Board of Health, and do a little bit of legwork before you actually submit your offer is huge. The more knowledge you have, the better pricing, the better deal you're going to get. But obviously, the better price you get, the more risk you're taking on, and it really comes down to what your comfort level is. So, I really appreciate your time, Nick. I think this was awesome. We had a lot of great conversation. I only plan it for half an hour so that we can just kind of touch some bases on a few different things. But if anyone has any questions, you're welcome to reach out to Nick at the law office of Attorney David Rochford's office in Leominster, or you can give us a call at the Real Estate Exchange. We'd be more than happy to answer any questions you have and guide you through the process of purchasing a foreclosed, auctioned, or regular home, or sell. Whatever you're looking to do, we're here for all your real estate needs. So have a wonderful day. Thank you, Nick. I really
Oh, you're
appreciate
very welcome.
it. And we'll see everyone again next month. We have it on foreclosed properties, so keep an eye out. I mean, auction properties. We'll have a great webinar on auction properties, and I hope that you'll all join us then. Thank you. I'll talk to you later, Nick. Have a great day.
Okay, Joanne.